You're working on a bill which is a China daily ban. First out of the blocks. Why?
Well, my first day elected, my first day in office here on Capitol Hill, I walk in, we see the typical newspapers, right? Washington Post, Politico, which have their own sets of issues. But then I look and I see the China Daily News, and I, was reading through some of it, and you have to be pretty discerning to actually discover that it was owned by the Communist Chinese Party and that they're registered foreign agents. So I had my team look into that. It's just fascinating to see the level of influence that the Communist Chinese have in our government. And I think it's unacceptable, and we should ban it, at least to be publicly distributed into the halls of Congress.
I think a lot of people would say, yeah, I see it around. I mean, it's in our building, kind of all over the place. They just drop it off in front of people's doors, not in front of our door. But they just say, yeah, well, it's around, but who really reads that?
Well, people read it. I mean, that's why they're doing it. And they know how to target it. They're going to the halls of Congress, lobbyists, and other organizations around Washington, D.C., because that's how the Communist Chinese know to put their influence into the United States' highest levels of government and the people surrounding the government. You get a collection, rubber band collection of all these newspapers that are coming in. And when you put that China Daily at the same level as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all of them, it's very scary because it's not. It's propaganda by a foreign government that's trying to influence the highest echelons of the United States government, and it's unacceptable.
There was a time when it functioned as an insert in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal at different times, and these media were paid millions of dollars for doing this. It was marked, people would say that it was marked as being a sponsored content or something like that.
Sure. Well, and that was probably, I can't stop what a private corporation does if they want to do that, but it goes to show you that the Chinese, the Communist Chinese understand that America is for sale, sadly, that they know how to influence and get themselves into the papers like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all of them. But right now, and this isn't a bill to ban it totally. If people want to read this, if they want to read this paper on their own, they want to go online, they are totally free. If they want to subscribe personally to it, they are free to do it. But to have it distributed in the halls of Congress should not be allowed.
You said something earlier. You said America's for sale.
Yeah.
And that could be viewed as quite a contentious statement. Is America really for sale? What do you mean by that?
Well, it's obvious. I mean, if you look at our farmlands are for sale that we sell to the Communist Chinese near air bases, near military bases, and this is something that other countries would never tolerate. And it's something that we have to put our patriotic duty ahead of the dollar. That's something that our corporations should be doing. It's something that every individual should be doing. It's key, and I respect other countries in that regard, that they would never sacrifice their honor for the dollar. And sadly, too often when you talk about these global corporations, and I hate that word, global corporations, because these corporations, they started off in America. They were built off American workers. They were built because of the laws we have here, because of capitalism, the free enterprise system. And yet, then they go and capitulate to a country like the Communist Chinese. And the Chinese are very smart. They've shifted away from Marxist Leninism. Now it's market Leninism, right? So it's so fascinating to see how they've been operating and maneuver into the global marketplace, and when they take advantage of the United States laws in order to influence, it's a big problem. But it's something that we as a culture need to be on guard against.
Let's dig into the nuts and bolts of the bill. And you mentioned FARA, which is the Foreign Registration Act, also in here. Just explain to me how the bill works.
So this one specifically targets the Communist Chinese. It prevents a foreign agent, so somebody who's registered as a foreign agent that's tied with the Communist Chinese, prevents them from distributing, and it prevents these third-party contractors, because that's ultimately who's the one passing out these newspapers. It prevents them from distributing the papers in the House of Representatives. You
think there will be other acts of this nature that will follow? Because I guess China Daily is not the only type of media that's influenced by a foreign government out there.
We kept it limited to the Communist Chinese because, to me, it's a good gauge to see how far deep the communist Chinese have reached into the halls of government. That's why I did it. I could have kept it broad. We could have kept it for all FARA, which eventually I hope to see happen. But I wanted to kind of assess at who signs onto the piece of legislation, who votes for it. I thought it was going to be an interesting test to see possibly how deep the communist Chinese infiltration has occurred.
That's fascinating. Another thing that I noticed, it's a resolution, and often resolutions are described as not having a lot of teeth. It's just kind of a statement from Congress. But in this instance, it actually does have teeth because the congressional building will have to abide by it.
Right.
So that's a very interesting use of the resolution.
Yeah, exactly. And it's because it becomes easier to pass, right? I mean, this is something, again, why I chose the communist Chinese and specifically target the China Daily is because once it's on the House floor, I want to see these members of Congress trying to justify allowing a newspaper that is foreign controlled by the communist Chinese. I'm very curious to see, and I think that I'm an intelligence guy. I'm always thinking about the second and third order effects and looking at the consequences, intentional consequences, and unintended consequences as well. We have to police our own in the halls of Congress, and that's what it intends to do.
You mentioned TikTok. We talked about DeepSeek briefly. How do you view these apps on, the phones of Americans and computers of Americans?
Well, I understand that many Americans like TikTok. I've used TikTok before. President Trump seems to like TikTok. It seems to get the truth out in so many ways. However, it becomes concerning when you understand that the TikTok platform and so many of these others have an algorithm and ability to influence the end user in a way that could be quite destructive. DeepSeek is something that, as we mentioned earlier, the ability for it to wipe about $1 trillion, $500 billion from a marketplace based off of conjecture. We don't know what the reality is of DeepSeek is, how much it really costs them to produce, what the chips that they're actually using for it, and for them to be able to wipe out that market share of the United States. I mean, $500 billion, that's bigger than the GDP of most countries. And that's the scary aspect of it. That when I talked to you about this earlier, it is information warfare. This is propaganda. This is psychological warfare. And we have to be, and that's where when we talked about the victims, that is the victim. when you wipe out, a lot of Americans' bank accounts and their investments because of that ability. And who knows if then at that point, again, since the marketplace is open, who knows if you had these foreign countries come in and buy the dip, so they say, in order to influence the market in that aspect. So it's so fascinating to watch. It's something that we will be watching in the future.
I had a interview recently with Nicholas Cheyenne, the former chief software officer of the Air Force and Space Force, who has an AI company himself right now, and he's run a ton of tests. He told me he runs tests on all the models, including DeepSeek, which he, sort of air-gapped, put into its own place, because of course he wasn't going to go on the actual DeepSeek platform, and he found it wasn't a particularly great model. He believes they just tested it against the benchmarks. The benchmarks looked really good, but it's fine. He says it's a fine model, but the American models are stronger. So to your point, right? Absolutely, this was an information op. It's almost like the case in point example of how effective propaganda can be. Is there a better example off the top of my head? $500 billion. That hurts, right?
Absolutely. And again, it was, imagine the China Daily pushing that out there and the media pushing out there that DeepSeek suddenly has taken over AI. That is the information that we have to be on guard against. And we were talking about this earlier. To see the level of influence the Communist Chinese has, it's not just in Washington, D.C. It is in the heartland. The bioweapons lab that they had the ability to produce another type of disease out in California. And you saw that just recently, the ports in LA that have communist Chinese infiltration, and as well as the secret police stations that are occurring in our cities, as well as the Confucius Institutes in our education systems. That is the level of information warfare that we are fighting, and that so many Americans want to act like is not happening. But it is happening, and it's not because they're just trying to export the cultural traditions of China, which of course has a very rich tradition that has been utterly destroyed by the ideology of communism.
To your point, it's something to the tune of, years ago we knew it was approximately $10 billion that was being spent on these influence operations. This United Front operations, influencing local communities, both Chinese and otherwise, through Chinese agents of influence in these. The scale of it today, we think it's something more like 20 billion, perhaps even more than that. And that's not even talking about these operations like DeepSeek or TikTok and everything else. The scale of it is almost unfathomable.
It's not just information warfare. There's a war going on here in the United States with fentanyl. My district, Arizona, I'm a border state. I see the fentanyl coming in from the chemical compound being shipped in from the communist Chinese into the hands of the drug cartels. And then they go in and ship this all across the United States and get the American citizens drugged up and addicted. And that's why President Trump, you see what he's been doing so successfully with these tariff threats and with going after our border countries like Canada and Mexico, but also the communist Chinese. It's so critical. I want the American people to understand that we may not have asked for this, but for this type of war, but it's, they're at war with us, and they're at war for the American mind. That's why you have TikTok out there. That's why you have DeepSeek. That's why you have the China Daily. They're out there trying to control information and your perception of reality. And we have to understand that. Talk to people who live through the horrors of the communist and Maoist revolution. That's how we keep this reality and what's real alive, and for us to understand, to fight back. That's why I'm a member of Congress. I'm the son of immigrants from Syria, from my family from Venezuela. So I understand that if freedom is extinguished here at home, there is no place to go. So we can never allow ourselves to bend the knee to the Marxist communists.